at that time we certainly didn't have inside toilets. And I guess for me, at about 15, first of all, the toilets were always outside and they had to be manually emptied by the family. And even when we would visit your mum and that in Cambrai, then of course somebody had to empty these tins out in the little dunny, as they were called, little houses, separate from the house, way out a little bit. And I remember that living in Gympie, and we had a new pastor coming and they bought a new house and there was a toilet in the house. I remember being absolutely astounded that you could put a toilet in a house. Do you remember that at all, or that didn't cross your mind?
Oh, yes and no.
Yes and no. Well, do you remember that right at the beginning, I remember thinking of our toilets in the backyard or down the paddock on some of the farms we lived on. There was no toilet paper in those days. We used newspaper. Did you do that?
Of course we did. Of course.
And, I mean, can you imagine that today? No, you couldn't, but that's the way it was back there. So we just wanted to mention that. And did you want to say something about...
I want to say something about the toilets inside. We didn't have toilets inside, we had them out against the horse stable to mix with the horse manure and so forth, more or less, or to be cleaned up with it. But the idea of having, what do we call these things, potties under our bed? What do we call potties these days?
Chamber pots.
Chamber pots,
yes, yeah. And they were used at night when you're in trouble and had to be emptied every morning.
Exactly. And then, because the toilet was way across the yard, near the horse stable and past the blacksmith and all this.
I think his toilets were further away than mine have ever been.
And my mum and my aunt, living at the same place, if they needed the toilet during the day, they would not be seen going across the yard to the toilet. So, used a potty.
The potty was under the bed usually, wasn't it? Many stories about that from our past, but I think we got to like the inside toilets, wouldn't you say? Very much so. I think we'll just divert for a little while. Some of the jobs that I did, I first started in Gympie when I was about 17 or something. I was always at home, and I didn't even have secondary schooling because Mother needed somebody at home to help with all the chores and the rest of the family, I guess. So I guess sometimes I have wished I could have, and I feel very thrilled with the people, even like your children, who have tremendous opportunities for study at all sorts of universities and things and opportunities, and I certainly didn't have that, but it was the way it was and I accepted that, and that was fine. But my first job outside of the home then was in Gympie when I got a job at a little cafe, and I guess I was helping with sandwiches and things, but I think maybe I had too much pride, or I was too self-conscious, or something. So when she asked me to sweep the footpath outside of the shop, there were people around, and I think that's the thing that turned around, and I said, I don't want to do that anymore. Most probably a good learning thing. But then I went to Toowoomba, in where we're living now in our last years in this retirement village, and that's where I worked as a house mother in Concordia College. And that was a big learning curve, going into something like that, just taking care of the girls and being there all night and everything. That I hadn't done anything like that before, so it's a big learning curve. And there I met Gladys Koch. She was Gladys Berger at the time, a teacher at the college, and her parents were from Victoria. So eventually I went with Gladys down south to Victoria, and there I did nursing in the Horsham Hospital, in the maternity wards, where you could nurse without any experience and just help with mothers, babies and everything, and I liked that so much. And then later I heard of a job at Canibba. Canibba is in South Australia, which is an Aboriginal mission of our church, especially at that time. It was was all run by the church, our LCA, our Lutheran Church of Australia, wasn't it? And there was a home there for Aboriginal children who were brought out of further areas and they would live there. And I was working in the home that supervised, sorted lots of things, mended things, saw that they cooked their own food and all sorts of things. So that was an interesting thing for me. And the only other thing I did outside of being a pastor's wife full time was to do a nursing course in Panmure in New Zealand, and that happened when, first of all, our oldest daughter Jan left New Zealand to go to Adelaide to go to LTC, the Lutheran Teachers College.
After she'd done a year's.
She had done a year's nursing. I think I've got that somewhere else. And also then Karen left to go to the same place in Adelaide, and the nest was getting a bit empty, and so then I suggested to my husband that I might apply to do community nursing, which is not the full nursing course, but it's a lower one, and I was accepted into that. And when I first mentioned that to my husband, he just laughed. That was enough to put anybody off, but I thought, well, forget it if they accept me, and so he was happy. So it was 2 years working and studying.
Try studying.
Full time, while you also nursed full time, and that was a great experience. One of the best ones I've had, I think, just getting outside of being in a Lutheran church, married to a pastor and always mixing with those people. I learnt a few other things, I think, mixing with other people, and especially at that time I had no idea that there may be a male nurse in the course. He was there and he was also a homosexual, so all that was a big learning curve for me. But the other friend I made was a 40-year-old at the time, as I was 40, and she too, but was totally non-Christian. But she was telling somebody else, when one of the girls in the groups where we had to move into groups, she suddenly realised, what, you're married to a priest or something? And the other nurse sticks up for me and she said, yes, I've met Arthur, he's fine, no problems. So that was good, but just to get me out of that I think was wonderful. So there we are.
Yeah, I'd like to just say a few things about our days at Seminary in Adelaide, in preparation to be a pastor of the Lutheran Church.
And can you tell us about how old you were when you went there? How did it start?
I went to the college.
Concordia College, Adelaide?
At the age of around about 14, 1945 to be exact, and did the usual secondary college sort of material. Intermediate examination, what we call the other one? Seconda,
or they all had different names, but that'll do.
Can't think anyhow. So that was normal that we had that. I still don't know how we afforded it financially. I think our wider family generally helped a bit here and helped a bit there.
And your uncle?
And my uncle no doubt helped in there too. And people were very kind to supply things like a kerosene tin full of apricot jam or something
or
like that.
Plum, was it?
Which was great stuff, except that one or two people forgot to wash the kerosene can before they
thoroughly
put the jam in, and that didn't always taste so good. But a lot of kindness, and
but I guess a lot of ladies' girls from the church supplied food to the college a lot, the seminary and the college.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there just wasn't a lot of money around, and I recall a headmaster of the school, and you'd think he had much more to do than that, but he would dish out our pocket money to us. Each week, if someone wanted pocket money, it would be sort of deposited with the headmaster, and so you'd humbly go there and ask for 2 shillings and 6 cents or something. No, they weren't
6
cents.
pence.
And 6 pence or something. That's your week's pocket money. We soon found out that that didn't go very far to buy books or to buy a few extras, etc. But I'll perhaps mention that a little bit later, especially in the seminary years. At that stage in our life, our secondary college and seminary, well, that's of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Australia, they were under one roof in Unley in Adelaide. So what was expected of the first year high school kids, no girlfriends and all this kind of stuff, and you certainly don't go out with girls, that applied also to the seminary under the same roof. And where seminarians today would think that's impossible, it was possible more or less. And that leads us to, I'll perhaps put it this way, when I was first, when I was asked to go to my first field of work, one of the first questions that our headmaster asked me is, will you be taking a wife with you? And you sort of say, why do you ask that question? I haven't seen a girl, for 10 years.
But he knew you had.
But they all knew that behind the scenes different things happened at times. So, and that's where I met Ruth for the first time, I guess.
That was to near the end of your seminary years. So I think we'll talk about that in a moment. If you talk about some of these challenges you were given as you were studying at the Sem.
I could do that.
Long before I knew you.
In my day, if we wanted to go to the seminary, study as pastors, it was taken for granted that we had to do work in English, in German, in Latin, in Greek, in Hebrew. And that nearly broke my back. Just the constant language stuff, which I found very, very difficult. And I look at my school reports and remarks today, and I'm amazed that they ever let me get through as far as graduation. But I guess they realised that there were some other things I could do even if I couldn't do languages. But having spent a huge amount of time on languages, and I would take so much longer than everyone else in the class, it meant that I also didn't take a lot of, do a lot of input into other subjects. So even those subjects went down because of the sheer lack of opportunity because of the language pressure. But anyhow, they could look past some of that, and they permitted me to graduate, which I'm grateful for. But what I was going to say is that one of the first questions, did I say that already?
No, that's...
One of the first questions that the headmaster asked me was, when you go into your first field now, will you be taking a wife with you? Did I mention that?
Yes, you mentioned that, but we'll
Yeah.
go back here.
But I have a brother who at that time was teaching at the Caniba mission station halfway between Adelaide and Perth or thereabouts, where Ruth was working. And while he was doing some courting elsewhere, he left me in charge of looking after the house where
your mother.
where my mother was staying. And he gave me a tin of paint. He said, I want this on the roof by the time I get back. So I was asked to do that. So I viewed the scene from the house, the teacher's residence, and that's where we met.
I was the only white woman on campus. Not quite.
The choice was simple then.
It was very simple for you, and at that time you had such blonde, golden hair, and you stood out amongst all of these Aboriginal people. That's for sure. Yes, so that's how we met.
But you have heard that Ruth also worked as house mother at Toowoomba, and I thought, well, if she could do that, she could be my wife, couldn't she? and a few other economical kind of things.
An economical lemon tart I used to make. That
Yes.
one person said that would be good, make a good pastor's wife. So I think he was more interested in that sort of thing than anything else about Ruth, if I'm honest about it. And maybe God saw to it that I was meant to go with you on this whole journey, and it's been an amazing journey, as we will fill you in later about the 7 parishes that we did together. But it was a short courtship. We weren't around, and he eventually decided to come to Queensland and see what's up there and meet the family and so on. So yeah, and I guess in hindsight, I even said to him the other day, we've just been married 57 years now, maybe it would have been better if we would have known each other a bit more right at the beginning. But God put it together.
On the other hand, we have just had 57 years of courtship.
I just said, I think it's been working together rather than courtship, but anyway, that's been so good. But Arthur, I would like you to go back up here to talk about some of the questions that were put to you when you wanted to be studying at the seminary there.
Oh, as I said, I was struggling with the language program particularly, but that affected every other part because I took so much less time to work at geography or mathematics or goodness knows what. And I guess those in the authority positions were really asking whether that was really my wish to go to the seminary and for what purpose, what my purpose was in thinking that way. Was it because you felt you were pressured to do that because of folk who had put money into your training program or something like that? And at least I could assure them that it was my real heart's desire, and that no one was pressuring me apart from the sheer desire to have the gospel reach other people, whether it be in Africa or whether it be in Australia or wherever. I guess that became more firmly fitted into my very
Your whole being.
My whole being over the years, particularly when we got into Bible studies, of how to share that with others and so forth. So it was a matter of conviction, and I guess it was largely on that they let me graduate, and the area that I had done in biblical studies and so forth, which I thoroughly enjoyed after a lot of the language hard stuff was out of the way.
I think the Acts of the Apostles were what you really
Acts of the
opened up for
Apostles
you.
really struck me, how the early church could grow and how it was working not only within the Jewish circles but the non-Jewish circles, Roman circles, and that was just taken for granted. That's part of everyday life of the Christian, is to let others know what we know of Jesus as our Saviour and Lord and so forth, which affected all my life, I think, in some way or the other, no matter which parish I worked, and each of them was very, very different, but that it certainly had in common to make Christ known to others.
And how did you make some pocket money while you were at the Sem?
At the seminary, pocket money was short, even to buy books and so forth.
And I guess, sorry, but I guess that was for a lot of them. Not only for you without a dad, others were, there just wasn't a lot of money around at that time.
If they didn't have any, we certainly had less.
Yes, that's what I mean. So what did you do?
So certainly in my seminary years, I and a few others made ourselves available to help at the local cemetery in Adelaide. So 1 or 2 afternoons after school, after class, we would go up to the seminary and we would fill in graves, we would tidy up places and all sorts, which was an experience in itself, especially by some of the folk who were putting up tombstones and so forth, who would all hide behind the tombstone while the graveside service was being held, and we would make ourselves scarce at that time too. But the moment the rest were gone, we were there filling in and tidying up again and all this kind of stuff. And so these
The workmen.
workers out there putting up tombstones and so forth, what the so-and-so do you think you're doing? Where do you come from?
Good swear words.
Come here for just a few hours a week and so forth. Oh, we come from the college. Oh, where's that? Oh, Concordia down the road. And what are you doing there? Oh, we're studying. Yeah. And suddenly one of them, it dawned on him. You mean to say, next year you'll be standing at the end of this grave here
With a book?
with a book and talking to people? He said, well, we can put it that way. And I don't think we heard another swear word from them for 2 years.
I think they were quite astounded, weren't they?
Having talked about digging graves and filling them in again as pocket money earners, there were other things we did. For example, on holidays we'd regularly do rabbit trapping, and we had the privilege of being able to sell carcasses.
You and your brother, is this, yeah?
Yeah, we used to do that together, and someone was picking them up every morning during holidays when we were trapping. So that was quite good pocket money too, but it was meaning being up early and all that kind of stuff, and go to bed late at night and all that.
Yeah.
Well, my brother was very keen on looking after chooks in his very young years already, and
He's still keen.
he had a special little pen made, and that was his poultry place. When he went to college, which was just 2 years before I did, I took over then, and I thought, well, if he could do that for pocket money, I could too. And the first year that he was at college, I carefully bred some chooks, some roosters, and they were going to be sold at Christmas time. This was our pocket money, of course, and so we put in, I forget how many, in the pen, in the coop, in the box,
Crate, box, whatever.
crate, and put them on the railway truck to take into Adelaide for sale. And I was expecting this cheque back any day, and one day I get a letter with of thanks. We managed to sell 3 of the roosters. The rest all died in the heat. So much for my first effort at poultry farming. But that was earning our pocket money.
Yeah. Would you like to say something about the unusual SEM class that you happen to have?
Class of 6 or 7 of us
7, I think.
graduated together. If I can recall correctly, I think only about 2 of us stayed with parish work,
It is only 2, yeah.
or mainly parish work. The rest went into all sorts of other areas of specialising in things, and but that's another story. I think I can leave it at that.
Presidents of churches and Harry Wentz and all of those people, so it was an unusual
John
one.
Cutt there.
Yeah.
So I guess just to sum up seminary days and so forth, I might mention that just before we did our final exams, this for me was end of 1955. When it came to the final exam, I find myself in bed again with rheumatic fever problems which had started when I was 5, hadn't bothered me in between, but it again laid me low in bed for several weeks.
I could say that most probably was very unusual to have it return again as an adult. Is that
Well,
what you
in
remember?
those days they didn't know much about rheumatic fever and what to do with it. And as I, at the age of 5, was supposed to spend the better part of the year in bed, and it's almost impossible to keep a 5-year-old in bed for that time anyhow. But the college doctor at that stage said to me, "Will you have any choice as to where you work when you finally graduate and finish. I said, normally we go where we're set.
Especially in those days, eh?
And he said, that's not really good enough. I said, what can you suggest? And he suggested we don't know very much about cures, we don't know very much about the best way to handle things, but he said, I would strongly recommend that you, if at all possible, get into a place climatically very different than the Adelaide winters and things like that. And I said, would you be prepared to tell the headmaster and the calling committee that that's where I'm at? Which he did. The result is that I was allocated or called, whichever was
Or sent, whatever.
sent, to work in anywhere between Cairns and Mount Isa in the northern part of Australia. So that was what was very much behind that, in addition to the fact that I could handle German reasonably well, at least in its biblical context, from all my opportunities that I've had under my grandparents in devotional life over my whole youth period of life.
And could we just say that for those who don't realise perhaps, Cairns, Mount Isa would be two of the hotter places in Australia that you could find, and very different from South Australia where you came from, with a heavy rainfall, a lot of humidity and very hot weather. Yeah.
So that was the background, and I was even out of bed for the last couple of exams, but within a couple of weeks I was I had the call or appointment to migrant mission work. No congregations formed there at that stage yet, and that was my task now to work. I wasn't the first person there to work as a pastor living in that area. One previous pastor had been there for 3 years, but that's what led to my first calling and appointment, and something I really enjoyed, even though it was tough.